Quote, "Those who promote this last fatal escape as a right should remember that such a right may quickly become an expectation and finally even a duty to die. We fear eventually some individuals and families will be forced to put financial concerns above the needs of loved ones." End quote. A statement against assisted suicide by members of Michigan's Religious Leaders Forum, a group of Christians, Jews, and Muslim leaders. I previously spoke on two opposing sides of whether doctor-assisted suicide, also known as euthanasia, should be legalized. I believe euthanasia should not be legalized. There are three items at the heart of this issue. The first regards the inherent value of human life versus the right to die. Secondly, the legalization of voluntary euthanasia creates a slippery slope that could lead to involuntary euthanasia. However, the legalization also creates the opportunity for terminally ill patients to end their suffering. Lastly regards the opening of the Hippocratic Oath, which is an oath all pre-medical students are required to uphold upon entry. This policy issue is important to me because I believe every human life has inherent value. We are all children of Christ. It is foolish to believe that we, as fallen beings, have the authority to determine whether God's purpose for an individual's life has been completed. On a more personal level, I care about this topic due to very real harm and temptations attached to the legalization of doctor-assisted suicide. This would not only be utilized by the terminally ill, but also those struggling with constant suicidal thoughts and tendencies. With the remainder time, I'm going to delve into a few reasons why euthanasia should not be legalized, and then respond to some of the major arguments made by the opposing side. Every human life has intrinsic dignity and immeasurable worth. In order for our legal system to be coherent and just, the law must respect this dignity in everyone. We can look to the word to better solidify the inherent value of human life that euthanasia would violate. Euthanasia is clearly prohibited by the Sixth Commandment, regardless of ill person's request. This moral principle is seen as the case of King Saul. Fatally injured, Saul commanded his armor-bearer to kill him, so that he would not suffer humiliation in front of his enemies. In contrast, when this news was brought to Saul's death to David, claiming that he had killed Saul at the king's own request in order to end his misery, David executed him for taking Saul's life. We see this in 1st and 2nd Psalm. It is also the result of the fall that we experience a physical death that is frequently accompanied by illness, suffering, and pain. While this truth is unfortunate, it is important to remember that to purposefully take someone's life is to violate God's clear moral order. The legalization of euthanasia is a slippery slope. Voluntary euthanasia is a halfway house to involuntary and non-voluntary euthanasia. If the termination of life is a benefit, the reasoning follows, why should euthanasia be limited to only those who give consent? Quote, "I have yet to hear of a set of guidelines for euthanasia which would not lead to terrible abuse, even in the opinion of those physicians who are sometimes willing to practice it. Inevitably, this form of therapy would separate to situations in which, at present, it would be unthinkable." End quote. This is a quote by neurologist Jonathan Pincus from Yale University. We can see an example of this abuse in the Netherlands. In 2013, the Netherlands Commission said something on euthanasia regarding 650 infants per year are eligible for euthanasia on the basis of children's diagnosis, as babies who, in spite of very intensive treatment, are certain to die in short time. Babies with poor prognosis and very poor expected quality of life, or babies who are not dependent on intensive treatment, but who face a life of severe suffering with no prospect of improvement. The individuals most likely to be assisted by the physicians in their suicide are those who suffer not simply from terminal illness, but also from depression, mental illness, loneliness, and despair. According to Dr. Herbert Hendon, quote, "Researchers have found hopelessness, which is strongly correlated with depression, to be the factor that most significantly predicts the wish for death." End quote. It would be very easy for euthanasia to transition into a gray area, allowing more and more individuals to take their lives when they are in a weak place. In early 2015, a 47-year-old divorced mother of two children was suffering from tinnitus, a loud ringing in the ears. She was granted physician-assisted suicide in the Netherlands. She left behind a 13-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter. Euthanasia not only takes these struggling individuals' lives, it also harms their loved ones. The first promise of self-restraint sworn to the Hippocratic Oath is, "I will neither give a deadly drug to anybody if asked for it, nor will make a suggestion to this effect." According to surgeon Kenneth F. M.D. PhD, the Hippocratic Oath established a group of physicians sworn and bound by it. The oath is taken as one enters medical school, not when one completes it. It allows for an environment where teachers are only instructing those students who have sworn to uphold the oath. It is restrictive and intolerant of ethical alterations in the medical community. The Hippocratic Oath rejects the view that a patient's choice for death can justify the act of a physician killing them. For the physician, at least, human life commands respect and reverence by its very nature. Quote, "The deepest ethical principle restraining the physician's power is not the autonomy or freedom of the patient, neither is it his own compassion or good intention. Rather, it is the dignity and mysterious power of human life itself, and therefore also what the oath calls purity and holiness of life and art to which he has sworn devotion." End quote. Physician Leon Kass. We live in an age when pledges of duty and reliability of the kind present in the oath are becoming aged. Lawyer Wesley J. Smith thinks that this is very unfortunate. He believes that the author of the oath understood that killing is not a medical act. Moving on to the opponent's side. Those who are trying to legalize euthanasia believe that individuals should have the right to end their life if they choose so. It allows terminally ill patients to avoid extreme pain and hasten inevitable death. Patients who are terminally ill should be allowed to execute their right to die, essential to personal autonomy and bodily integrity. Americans should enjoy a right guaranteed in the European Declaration of Human Rights, which is the right not to be forced to suffer. Moving on to my rebuttal. The body of my speech has primarily addressed the opposing views. However, on top of my previous statements, it is important to note that ending someone's life in order to relieve suffering or inconvenience is not only unjustifiable, it violates God's clearly defined moral order. Suffering should bring us not to end life prematurely, but to entrust ourselves more completely to our faithful God no matter what befalls us, for those whom we love. We see this in 1 Peter 4:19. We can find strength and ultimate hope in Christ, who has conquered death and can sympathize with human suffering. Based on God's love, Christians are to extend self-giving compassion and care to those who are suffering or vulnerable, unborn or born, young or old. In conclusion, based on the elements of legalization of euthanasia goes against, such as harming the inherent value tied to human life, creating a slippery slope where euthanasia could be abused, and changing one of the long-standing principles within the Hippocratic Oath for physicians to uphold and value every patient's life, I propose that euthanasia should not be legalized. We are called to love our neighbors. This includes making the hard decisions and supporting our weaker members, showing them that their lives contain just as much value as our own. It is through love that we will stand by their side, comfort, and pray for them. Care, don't kill.